mother.
What did you do to me?
Knows.
Directed and co-written by Rod Blackhurst, we are talking Dolly. And let me tell you, a new horror icon has entered the chat. This is a brutal slasher movie. And this one stars Seann William Scott, but he isn't the main character here. But has a reasonably large supporting role, larger than I was actually expecting, to be honest. But certainly not the main character. And the story focuses on this couple that are going out for a romantic hike in the woods with a guy is going to propose to his girlfriend. And she's a little hesitant because, you know, he's a single dad. But, you know, they love each other, etc. But they are interrupted by a killer. A hulking killer played by professional wrestler Max The Impaler. And this Dolly, because she's wearing this kind of porcelain doll mask, seemingly kills the boyfriend and abducts the woman, takes her back to this house, this dilapidated outhouse in the middle of the woods, where she wants to play with her as her new doll. There are a couple of other twists and turns in the movie. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. So this is unnerving in a kind of skin crawling type of way. Let me tell you, this movie is brutal. Let's discuss a little bit more detail about what works. So I believe this was actually shot in 16mm, and as such it has this kind of gritty, kind of grimy feel to it. It feels like in many ways a sort of spiritual successor to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It very much feels like it's of that ilk, and not a direct rip-off by any means, but certainly a kind of a comparable movie. And the character of Dolly is almost like a Leatherface for perhaps a new generation. Is the best way I'd kind of describe it. A kind of potentially iconic killer. So why do I like this movie? First of all, I like the presentation. I kind of like this kind of gritty sort of kind of feel to the movie has. I mean, it doesn't go as far as having, like, you know, fake kind of scratches on the film and things like that. There was an amount of restraint here, but I still quite liked its kind of the way it was filmed. Gives it a kind of a vintage sort of feel to it without kind of being over the top. It just feels like a kind of somewhat sort of, you know, drive-in sort of style movie, grindhouse kind of feel to it, which I quite appreciated. I've got to say, I think the acting is pretty strong. Macy, who is really our main character, the girlfriend, you know, she's playing against Seann William Scott, who's a recognisable name. You've got Ethan Suplee as well in here, so a couple of recognisable faces. But I think she does a great job, and, you know, we spend the most amount of time with her, and, you know, I think for a movie like this, which is effectively a slasher movie, these kind of roles could be somewhat kind of throwaway. But I've got to say, I thought she did a pretty good job in her acting. I also think her character specifically, and I'll say why I say that in a minute, is actually written to be quite smart in the way, for the most part, in the way that, I mean, there's a couple of, you know, typical horror movie things that happen, but when she kind of, for example, is kind of kidnapped by Dolly, she sort of realises that this character is clearly mentally unstable and kind of plays along with it to a degree to try and maybe sort of gain an opportunity. So the character comes across as not a complete idiot. You know, she's trying to kind of think her way out of the best situation. What can she do to kind of get out of this kind of situation? So I thought she was our main character, well acted, and relatively well written. There's a couple of times, you know, there's a typical thing where, is the killer dead? You know, we know that they're not going to be. Yeah, there's a couple of horrid things that happen like that, but yeah, there you go. Max The Impaler, who I'm be honest with you, I'm not familiar with as a wrestler. I think does a physically imposing job as this kind of this killer. And their performance, although I think possibly might be a little problematic for some, we'll come on to why, I think definitely gets across this character is truly unhinged. You know, not a character, not a individual you could reason with by any means. You know, she was like a complete, you know, off the wall, deranged kind of character, a real lunatic. Probably not politically correct to be saying that, but whatever. You know what I mean. It's a very kind of like unhinged character. So that was good. And physically imposing and scary looking. I like the design here. I mean, we've seen kind of doll-faced killers one or two times before, to be honest with you. But I quite like the design. The Dolly character is physically imposing. Quite interesting in regards to what you're kind of reading, what you're reading into the character in regards to what's happened. This movie, it kind of gives you some idea about the backstory without really ever giving you that much. There's a few things that are hinted at where you can kind of piece together, but it doesn't kind of sit here kind of giving you a bunch of exposition about what's happened up until this point. But there are some elements here where you can kind of, you know, put the pieces together yourself to a degree. Like I seen this Dolly character has clearly had a mother figure at some point who's died, and therefore you can think maybe this Dolly character may have been a little bit more easier to control at that point, and maybe this is why now she's being, you know, problematic. So you know, there's that. There's some great, just creepy imagery here. Like this kind of forestry area, there's just dolls like hammered, nailed to the trees and things like that. It looks all very kind of creepy. Quite a good use of some kind of like good kind of like sound effects and kind of creepy music, like, you know, kids kind of like wind up tune music and things like that. But let's talk gore, because whoo, this one was making me wince. Let me tell you, bloody hell. It's a movie that is done practically. There is some painful looking scenes in this one. Let me tell you, if gore is not your thing, you do not like to see like depictions of pretty graphic violence on screen, you may want to skip this one, because boy, this one looks painful. It's a movie where you're thinking, ooh, when you're watching it, ooh, you know, it's kind of like that. But it's done very well. I mean, the effects here, I've got to say, are of a good quality. You know, kind of joking aside, it looks kind of realistic and stuff. And it's strong, but maybe, I mean, I don't know if I would say it necessarily feels exploitative necessarily. It's strong and explicit, but I think the violence feels earned to a degree because of the brutality of the situation. It doesn't feel like it's necessarily wallowing in the kind of the explicit nature. It is explicit, but you kind of feel it's sort of warranted based on the kind of the situational things that happen. So that I thought was quite good. The movie is quite well paced. It's not overly complicated. There's not kind of like a bunch of other kind of like, you know, red shirts that turn up and things like this. It's a relatively self-contained story, kind of a simple story. Overall, I think as long as you have a relatively strong stomach, I think this will make slasher fans happy. Okay, so what doesn't work in this movie? There's one or two things here that are a little bit on the silly side. And I don't want to give specifics because I don't want to spoil anything. But, you know, there's a couple of things where horror tropes happen. I've kind of hinted at one. There are instances where you think, you know, as much as I think that the character of Macy is actually written to be relatively smart, The boyfriend, on the other hand, maybe not. Especially at the beginning, you know, you hear, you see, you walking through this forest, you see there's a variety of kind of dolls that are nailed to trees, and then you hear this kind of creepy wind-up music. What's the first thing you're going to do? Is you're going to get out of there, aren't you? You are going to go back the way you came as quickly as possible. What you won't do is go walk on your own to check it out and see what happens. And then eventually when you see someone hunts down looking very kind of suspicious, you won't go and tap him on the shoulder. But that's exactly what happens. So, you know, you could arguably say, as much as I think the Macy character is written relatively well, the Seann William Scott's character, not as much. And then there's a couple of other things that happen. Sound doesn't seem to exist in this movie on certain scenes. There's a scene towards the end of the movie where someone's got their back turned and, you know, there's steps clearly walking behind them, and somehow they don't hear it in the silence of the forest. So there's a couple of elements like this where it, you know, because it feels so brutal at times and so hard hitting. When it has a slightly goofier moment, I don't know. It sort of, I wish it didn't, to be honest, because I think it would have been a little bit stronger had it had just that kind of a bit more of a realistic feel sometimes. So I think that maybe it ends up being just a little bit hokey at times. Not that often, but there's just a few instances where that is the case. It has a post-credit scene, which I feel is a completely different tone to the rest of the movie. It feels really throwaway. To be honest with you, you don't need to watch it. It doesn't affect the story in any way. It feels like it's more sequel bait than anything else. But the tone of it feels completely different from the rest of the story. But I won't really judge it too much on that because it feels like it's more of an afterthought. As I've hinted to, if you are sensitive about the depictions of mental illness on screen, this one's not going to be winning any awards for it. Let me just put it like that. So depending on how you feel about it, especially in this day and age, 2026, I think people are maybe more sensitive about this kind of thing than maybe they used to be in the glory days of, you know, Maniac and things like that. It feels like it's definitely a throwback to those movies, but maybe people would have more an issue with it this day and age, to be honest. So that's going to be up to you, really, whether it's something you would maybe feel a little less comfortable with. But again, I'm not necessarily going to judge it on that too harshly, because it is what it is. You know, it's an old school slasher film. I'm going to say I really enjoyed this movie. I think it's a very well done slasher movie. And I'm not the biggest slasher fan, I'm going to be honest. But I think this character of Dolly is effective and genuinely scary. Genuinely kind of like unsettling. And this movie is just well done. I mean, the few elements I have a problem with are relatively minor. But, you know, it's worth a watch as long as you have a strong stomach. That's what I'm going to say. 8 out of 10 for me. This was a good one. Let me know your thoughts if you've seen it. Please do let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.